Today's big question, what is going on in college soccer? There's plenty going on and off the field in the world of collegiate soccer. And to bring us up to speed, we are happy to be joined by the Midwest Regional Scout at the Soccer Syndicate and major contributor to We Are Soccer, Brooks Lambeer. Welcome to the show, sir.
What's going on, gentlemen?
Good to have you, Brooks.
Looking good.
Thanks. Let's see. Matches kick off tomorrow for college soccer. So the Thursday matches for the first round go. So going down to Akron and watching play Princeton tomorrow. So it's supposed to snow a little bit. So,
Nice.
Yeah. Do they call so for context, for folks not following along, the NCAA tournament kicks off tomorrow. The bracket was selected yesterday. So this is a big part of the year for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the fall for the Soccer Syndicate for us is the biggest time. Obviously, USL2 season with the college boys, playing in the summertime. But yeah, it's the busiest time to help our MLS and USL clients out with the college players, the college draft for MLS, and then helping USL clubs decide, hey, which guys maybe fall off the board, don't get drafted, that they can pick up, after everything's done with that, or they can get ahead and they can sign these guys before the draft happens. So, it's a very busy time for us.
Before we talked about the tournament specifically, just overall in the regular season and the 2024 men's college soccer season, what was a highlight or a theme of the season that stood out for you?
Yeah, it was an interesting year in college soccer. Obviously with me doing a lot of the Midwest, seeing those teams live, and then, using ESPN Plus and the other networks, that you can find it on streaming for the matches. I don't definitively think there's really a team that is so dominant that they can just run all the way to College Cup and win. I mean, listen, Ohio State I've seen live twice this year, the number one overall seed. Brian Masenoff's done a phenomenal job with that program. A lot of injuries last year. That team probably could have been on par last year if he didn't have a lot of injuries in his lineups and just didn't go as well. But Ohio State's probably one of the best teams I've seen across college soccer that's played consistently, can score goals, plays exciting soccer. Listen, you can't count out Indiana. I mean, we know the Hoosiers are a very historic program, and you can't rule them out of them making a run in the NCAA tournament. They didn't start off the season very well this year, but they crushed it in Big Ten play. Unfortunate first-round loss to Michigan in the Big Ten tournament. I think Jason Buckner hit that shot. I think he closed his eyes and hit that one, and luckily it went in. Went shadows and light there at the old Bridgeview Stadium where the Fire used to play, which has always been an issue there. But listen, like, it's a competitive environment. There are small conference teams that can beat bigger powerhouse teams like the game I'm going to. I'm sure Princeton has a pretty good chance because Akron, Ivy League has 3 teams in this year, so they're doing something right.
Would you say the level of play is going up or down in that space?
It varies, I think with the COVID years, this is the last year everyone has an extra year for COVID. Next year you should see college soccer being, you have 4 to 5 years. You're not having these guys with 6 or 7, some of these guys were 6 or 7, had a medical redshirt, or they redshirted 1 year, so it's interesting. The smaller schools tend to rely on the international players, and some of the bigger schools like your Clemson's and some other ACC schools, for sure, they rely on internationals mixed with domestics. But has the level dropped? In some circumstances, if you're looking in the MLS draft for a guy, I mean, there may be 4 or 5 guys that maybe can make an MLS roster than MLS Next Pro, and then most of them are USL guys. But, it's a good steady place for kids to develop. Whether you played for an MLS academy or you played for just a club team and, you move into the college game. So, there is still room for development for players in college soccer. And I think it's still a good level. They play good football. A lot of the schools, ACC, you're going to play a lot of tiki-taka soccer. Big Ten, you get a mixture of styles. You get some direct play sometimes. You get some tiki-taka. You get a mixture of like pressing and such. Out in California, a lot of tactical soccer, technical. That's like kind of how the players are out there on the West Coast. East Coast, you'll find a little bit of that. Same with down south. So you get a good kind of a branch of styles of play across college soccer.
Very interesting to hear you mention the international players, particularly at the smaller schools, Brooks. When I was hosting a daily American soccer radio show. Occasionally we would get into college soccer. And I remember distinctly getting calls from parents, from college soccer fans, I think sometimes from coaches, although I don't know they were always identifying themselves as
Yeah.
such. A lot of them lamenting the developments in college soccer and how it's turned international. I know there are whole companies whose entire focus is finding players, particularly those who have maybe played some academy football over there, and then that's not going to work out for them. We have examples, right? Julian Gressel is a good example of a player who found a second life in the sport in the United States. What is the balance there right now? Where do you think we are in sort of how international players have affected the game, good or bad? Is it tough to maybe pin that down?
I mean, listen, I think it's a good thing these international boys come in to college soccer. It's a different standard they have. I think in Europe, they live and breathe the sport. I think the domestic player, it is obviously with the national team, you can see in the national team, youth national team setup, it's getting better. But I think some of these domestic players don't understand what it takes to really work hard and to put the time and effort into it. Like I said, international players live and breathe soccer. So you go to training, you got a soccer ball at your feet. When you leave training, you're messing around with the soccer ball at home, playing with your friends, pick up, whatever you can do. It's a little different, I think, for the domestic game because I do youth scouting. I do scout MLS Next, ECNL, in the Midwest area. I go out to big national tournaments, a few times a year. You can definitely tell the difference of the kids that live and breathe the game that are domestic, which is growing, which is good. But I think the international player brings a little competition to the domestic player. And I think that's a good thing because it sets a standard and it tells the domestic kid, hey, like, if I want to get to this level, I want to be better, and this kid was in this top academy, and I want to play pro, I think this is the level I need to get to. And also, it helps. I think Marshall's a great example. I don't think Marshall would have won a national championship if Chris Grassi didn't have all the international players. Now we can poo-poo that and say, well, but I think everyone aims for Marshall now. Like we want to beat them because they have a lot of international players. They probably have like 3 or 4 domestic guys on their roster, but it helps the small schools become relevant. And I think that's important. And as we even talk about the lower division pro game in USL, like I want small towns, schools to be relevant in the game of college soccer, because if you go to a Marshall, West Virginia game, they have no pro sports in West Virginia. It is crazy the amount of fans that know the players, know who they are. It's just like if they were watching a college football game. Last spring, the Columbus Crew won a spring league, and Marshall played Michigan State. And I was sitting in the stands, and for that last game, there were like five games going on that day. And there was the last game of the day. There was a championship game between Michigan State and Marshall. Michigan State won. But I sat with all these Marshall fans just talking, and they knew everything. It was like they were a European fan. And I thought it was awesome to see that. And to see that in the state of West Virginia, which has probably always been pro football and basketball, is something great to watch and to see, and that they're taking a liking to the game. And I was like, listen, would you guys welcome a pro team? And the fans like, yeah, like, and I was like, where would it most likely be? And they said probably Charleston, if anything, so it's great to see the spread of the game go into these different states in the areas where you think they would never get to,
It's interesting. You're kind of sharing that the college game is kind of becoming culturally reflective and styles are regional.
Yeah,
that's unusual. So is that something that's decreasing with the internationals, or is that something that's strengthening with people staying closer to home to play their college ball?
I think it strengthens it. If you find that maybe in your area around, especially there's different schools that, you can be an ACC school like Clemson, Wake Forest, Indiana, the whole country's your oyster at that point. Kids send them emails every day of, I want to be a part of your program. And, they go out to the MLS Next tournaments and scout the MLS Academy kids, non-MLS, all those programs, so if they wanted to, they'd have a choice of like 50 kids across the country that are probably pretty good. But in reality, they can only take so many. So, I think, it's with the international kids, it's just, it's been good. And the styles of play, they help, a certain school, let's take Oakland University, for example, or, maybe a Horizon League school that's, doesn't have the budget, but can bring in an international kid. The kid wants to come over for an education. It does. It makes them maybe from more direct team to maybe a team that can play a little bit more, or maybe play direct into the final third and then keep the ball and play a little bit. So it changes a little bit for the small schools and how many scholarships they have and the amount of money they can give players. Obviously, the international players, I think a lot of the schools will probably use a lot of their athletic budget, so, but it's changed the game. It's been great for the small schools. It's good for the big schools. And I just love how competitive it is. It's different from USL2. It's different from the Academy League. I think MLS Next, you get a lot of players that they're competitive. Like, when FC Cincy and obviously Columbus Crew play and the LA Academies, Galaxy and LAFC play each other. Those are always good games, but you don't find a consistent competitiveness, and everyone wants to grit and everyone wants to get at it. In the college game, it's win or go home. You have to win. You have to win your conference tournament. You have to do well in the regular season. And then it's one game elimination in the NCAA tournament, and I know it's not conventional to a lot of people in the European game, but if you want the national championship, you got to win and get results.
You mentioned obviously scholarships. Scholarships is a big part of college athletics. Everybody knows that. What has changed in the last couple of years is obviously the NIL and all those things and how they've impacted this. And you gave us a bit of a primer on some changes that are coming in terms of how scholarships work in all of college athletics. How is that going to impact college soccer? And I guess this is both not just for the men, but for the women as well.
Yeah. So with this new, this new ruling, the House versus the NCAA, there's going to be an increase now of football scholarships and other obviously big time, sports, non-Olympic sports, right? I would put it that way. So, with the increase from football going from 85 to 105, where are they going to take scholarships from and where are they going to, what are schools going to do? Are they going to fund, are they going to fund the scholarships? Are they taking from programs? So schools that have football, I'm curious to see how, these powerhouses like Akron, Western Michigan, Western Michigan has now recently become, a very, a school that's been good on the men's college soccer side. How do these schools, are they going to lose scholarships? Are they going to maintain it? Because they have football programs. A lot of the college coaches I've spoken to, big and small school, say that basketball if you just have a basketball program at your school and you don't have football, you should be feeling pretty good. It shouldn't be too much of an influx and whatnot. But the thing I worry about is, we want to grow the game in America. I don't want to lose men's college soccer programs and make it more difficult for kids that want to play at the next level that need development for 4 years in a college program. I don't want that to happen because that doesn't look good for the game in America. So with the constant changes of the scholarship rule that are happening, the class of 2025, it's going to be interesting to see what coaches are doing. I've talked to a few different coaches, some have finished their 2025 recruiting class. Some are waiting to see what the ruling is. And, it's going to be capped for men's and women's college soccer at 28 scholarships. You could see in the women's game, there's already girls saying, hey, like they I can't go there because they've capped it at 28. The men, you're starting to see that a little bit too. But I know college coaches, a lot of them are being very cautious about not over recruiting 2025s, and the kids in the 2026 recruiting classes, are just like, hey, how's this going to work? It should be a little easier for them. But I mean, there's a lot of different things kind of going on. I do help a few kids, in the area, deal with college recruiting, and they tell me about the situations when they meet with the college coaches and whatnot and what's happening, and they're worried about certain things. So it's interesting to see how it's going to play out here with all the scholarship changes.
A question I had, kind of the big question is, with all these changes coming in and just all the development paths for American domestic players, youth clubs are kind of geared to sending kids to college. And you said there's 4 or 5 out of a college class that could become MLS pros. Is college still a viable path to becoming a professional soccer player?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, I just quickly, before I came on here, I went over the guys that were currently just in the U.S. national team, guys that went into camp. Matt Turner played Fairfield. Mark McKenzie played a year at Wake Forest. Tim Ream, SLU. Aiden Morris played a year. I saw Aiden play at IU. Patrick Schulte played a few years at SLU. Zach Steffen played a few years at Maryland. Tanner Tussman was going to go to Clemson at some point. He signed the homegrown contract. But I think it is a viable option. It is a great option for kids to develop. The MLS Flex program is very interesting. It's very open, and it reminds me of I called it an advanced U23 league. That's what I call it. You could probably throw some USL high on USL2 teams in there. And I think they do well. They compete. I watch those games on Apple TV all the time, the MLS Next Pro games, and some are good, some are, these kids are learning. They're 16, 17 being thrown in against, some sides that put, college guys that played for 4 years in a mixture with their academy kids. It's different. I think the college game, it allows a player to not feel pressured to have to sign a homegrown contract if they're an academy kid. I think a lot of these MLS academies tend to pressure these kids because, listen, you get bonuses, these guys on the inside for signing these homegrown contracts. And I don't think that's right to force a kid to want, to do that because you get a bonus for it. I think college can be a good place to sit for a few years, strengthen, play competitive soccer where games mean a lot. Not to say MLS Next games don't mean a lot, but it gives you an opportunity to sit somewhere and develop, go to school, get your education. And in some instances with some colleges, you play 2 to 3 years, you can leave for the pro game and they'll honor your scholarship when you come back after you're done being a pro player. So there are a lot of advantages to going into the college game. It's just with players in America, they need to take the advantage of wanting to develop as a player and not relying just on the coaches that coach them to develop them as a player, if that makes sense. A lot of kids that I tend to find, they have good freshman and sophomore years, but then they drop off junior and senior year. I'm like, where did it go? That's the thing with what us doing scouting is, we see kids over a long period of time, and we see kids that are great for the first 2 years. They have some good upside, but then they kind of get cocky. They make an all conference team, they're all Americans or whatever. And some kind of kids don't realize is, I don't think many people at the pro game care if you were an all conference guy or all freshman team or whatever. It doesn't mean anything. It's what you do on the field every day that counts, when we're scouting kids. So I think it's a good place for development. It could be a place, that the players can grow. You've seen it. There's guys in the MLS that get drafted that make impacts for their teams. USL could probably do a better job, in my opinion, of signing the college kids, honestly, and getting to know the college markets a little better. But again, USL is a growing league, give it time, but it's an interesting place for development for players for sure.
All right, Brooks, we talked about the NCAA tournament kicking off tomorrow, and it's a big tournament, and this is the traditional time of year for this tournament. We get down to the College Cup and all the excitement around it. But there are people who think that college soccer needs to adjust and modernize. And what's crazy to me is I'm thinking, okay, when did I first talk to Sasha Sarovsky about this plan? We're talking, 5 years ago at this point?
Maybe more than that.
This was, maybe more than that. So where are we on the idea that college soccer needs to move beyond this sort of very short rush to an end through the fall of the calendar?
Yeah. I think a lot of college coaches are very split on this decision. You have to remember this. College coaches also coach a lot of youth soccer. So if they play a full year, they may not be able to coach club soccer in some instances. So that's kind of where a secondary income may come from, the assistant coaches or maybe a few head coaches at smaller schools. So people are very split on it. I think the bigger schools, like the ACCs and the Big Tens, obviously there's no more Pac-12 because that dissolved, and you got, Stanford and Cal going over play in the ACC now for men's soccer. And then obviously Washington, UCLA for the Big Ten. I think the bigger conferences are very much for it. The smaller schools, it's tough. It's a hit on your budget, right? You got to think, hey, there's usually an athletic trainer signed for a few different teams throughout the year. It's a little rough if you're an athletic trainer, you do men's and women's soccer, and then you're doing baseball or softball in the spring, right? Like, how do you handle that? How are you going to, hire people to fill those spots and positions at the smaller schools? So that's going to be an interesting question with that. But I think a lot of the college coaches see it as a good thing. And I see it as a good thing as well. As it's a condensed 3-month schedule right now. It is really tough when you get injured that you miss a couple weeks, and that could be 7, 8, 9 games. So I think for the health of the player, I think it's very important. And I think a lot of college coaches realize that is it needs to go to 2 semesters where you're playing 1 game a week, and maybe some weeks you're playing a Saturday, then a Wednesday, I watched Washington come out to Michigan and Michigan State this past fall. And they got in at like Thursday night, slept all day Friday, and played Michigan State Friday night. And then they looked better against Michigan on the Monday, but it's just not conventional for schools, for kids, it's the health and then also the academic part. these guys are student athletes. They have classes, and you can work around a whole bunch of stuff, obviously, being an athlete at a university. But I think the big push for this is the healthy academics. And then the third part of it is the development of the player, which, given what I said previously about development, I think if you go to a 2-month, it could make it very interesting to see which college programs, big or small, start to develop players, and which kind of are like, well, they were really good in a 3-month season, but they struggled to develop guys over, a 2-semester model. So I think from what I've heard, it's hearsay. There's nothing conclusive, but for me, I think it'd be very interesting if the model switch, and I think it'd be better overall for college soccer in general.
Well, possible calendar change, scholarship change, lots possible change on the horizon. Yeah. But in the short term, the NCAA tournament kicks off tomorrow. Brooks Lambeer, thank you so much for giving us a primer, both on the tournament and for what may come with college soccer in general. So you can check out Brooks Lambeer on We Are Soccer, and he's the Midwest Regional Scout for Soccer Syndicate. Thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Kick-Around.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thank you, Brooks.
All right. If you want to follow along, give us a subscribe on Morning Kick-Around YouTube channel. And if you want to follow us along on social media, Kick-Around on X and Instagram.